The film starts and a lady is seen who was much worried about the coming sounds from the plug hole of her kitchen. Those sounds were very horrible and mysterious. She was trying to stop the sounds, but those sounds were not stopping. And the sounds were increasing when that lady's husband comes at home. Then there was no meal for him because she had not cooked the food. When Juan asks this reason, then she tells him that mysterious sounds are coming from the plug hole of the kitchen. As a result, she did not cook the food, Juan notices, going into the kitchen. The sounds were still coming, Juan says to his wife. These sounds are coming from the pipe and plumber will repair it. There is nothing to be feared, but his wife says to him that those sounds are saying something to us. Then he asks him, what are those sounds communicating us? Her wife tells him that those sounds are conveying the message of death to us. Juan takes his wife's story wired. He does not believe in her story, it is seen in the next scene. They both were sleeping, then Juan's wife goes to the lavatory. Then Juan wakes up and he hears some of the sounds across the wall. But he thinks that his neighbor is renovating the house. But he thinks who renovates his house at 5 a.m. This sound was disturbing John's sleep, so he says to his neighbor while calling, "Stop this irritating sound." But the sounds were not stop coming. But he speaks ill to his neighbor, going in front of his house. And he falls asleep, coming to his bedroom. The hitting sounds on the wall are again started. Now John realizes that these sounds are coming from another side. It means that his neighbor is not creating these sounds. John comes into the lavatory and observes that his deceased wife is swaying in the air. And she is also hitting her head on the wall again and again. And his wife's body was covered with a red liquid, blood. John is very scared, seeing it. And he tries to save his wife, but his wife was perhaps bewitched. And she loses her breath while hitting her head on the wall. The scene moves from here, and John is seen in a psychiatric facility. 3 paranormal investigators had come to investigate Juan. They had come to talk about the last night incident. The night when his wife had been murdered. But Juan was being considered the murderer of his wife now. So these 3 investigators had come here for his help. Police may not believe in it what had been told to police by Juan. But they had belief in the story of Juan. So they ask Juan about the time of 2 weeks ago of his wife's murder. Or the happening of the normal incidents. Juan tells them on it that an accident had occurred in front of their house. The child had died in it, and he also tells in it that his neighbor used to hit the wall at any time. Or the mysterious sounds used to come from the walls. And he used to say on asking that he is renovating the house. Now the same neighbor of Juan is seen in the same office. Who is in familiarity before the death of his wife's death. He tries to talk with the paranormal investigator here. But his assistant says to him, he is busy right now. You can leave message for him. Now Juan's neighbor was looking worried because he was facing supernatural incidents. The scene shifts here and his neighbor is seen slept inside the house. His bed itself begins to swing here. Meanwhile, he is scared. And he looks under his bed, but there was no one. At the same time, a ghost is seen there who is fearing him. Next day, he informs the same investigator, going to his office. His assistant responds the same as he is still busy. But Juan's neighbor tells his assistant that he is facing something supernatural. His assistant says to him on this, you will have to present a proof. He encounters Juan on the way as he returns back to his home. And he tells him that a crack has appeared on my home wall because of your home renovation. And his neighbor soon replies him, he will soon renovate his house. But the reality was this, as he was doing nothing in his house. But something supernatural was being happened with him. Now he fixes a camera in his room to record all these happenings. And he falls asleep and the same things begin to occur with him. And he wakes up again in fear when he wakes up after being afraid. Then he notices that his camera has dropped down. But he is scared, witnessing the recorded side in the video camera. That a ghost-like thing scares him on the daily basis. Now Juan's neighbor had got a proof that a ghost appears at his backside. And he attacks him. The scene is dropped here. After this, a child is seen in the coming scene. His ball had bounced in John's neighbor. That child approaches here and he begins to drink the water, picking his ball. Meanwhile, some sounds scare that child and he takes his step backward. Suddenly, a bus hits that child, approaching there. At the same time, Juan hears a loud noise. And he observes, coming outside, that his neighbor named Alicia's son has met his end. The blood was spread on the road, which is cleaned. Afterwards, that child is buried in the graveyard. Then the same psychiatrist is observed. who was investigating something from Juan. And he had received his old friend's call and he asks him to visit him. Consequently, he has to move to him at midnight. He comes to his police friend and shows him that Alicia's late son's dead body was seated on a chair at the front. His friend tells that psychiatrist, "How did it appear here?" It was unknown. But that dead body was shaking. How is it believable? He tells his police friend, it is perhaps something supernatural, but he had no any proof. So he does not believe in his story, he might have no trust in such stories. Meantime, a glass of milk is fallen down placed on the table, which was placed before the dead body. They both are terrified, seeing it. Next day, that paranormal investigator comes in front of the house. As Juan's neighbor woman is taking photos, that investigator goes to him and says, "Hi." That woman's name was Mora and she was also an investigator. He tells her that he has seen her many sessions about paranormal activities. After this, he accompanies her before the house of Alicia. And he reveals the whole story to her. How Alicia's son's dead body has come in the house after being removed in the graveyard. Now that doctor also examines that dead body. After it, they both discuss about the supernatural and paranormal activities. The child comes there while jumping the wall. And he witnesses Alicia's son sitting on a chair before the window. This child knocks at the window, then that dead body shakes its head. Seeing it, the child is badly scared after witnessing it. He runs away, giving a loud shriek, then both investigators reach here, hearing his shouting. They notice that the door was unlocked. There was also a kept bag there, which belonged to that child. Now that investigator preserves that dead body into a freezer, wrapping in a piece of cloth. After a time, his police friend comes there who had come here to take this dead body, so that he may bury this dead body again. Suddenly, this freezer shakes speedily. And strangest sounds are heard, then they all talk to bury this dead body with the freezer. The scene moves to the character John again, who is sitting in a psychiatric facility. And those same supernatural researchers are in front of him. They hand John over a paper on which his signature was required, which was the consent of this thing as they may investigate his house. Because the area where these supernatural incidents were happening, they had taken the permission from its owner, now they also take the agreement of John. Taking their equipment, they reach that area. Now that lady investigator approaches John's house for investigation. The other two investigators visit to the house of John's neighbor. And fourth investigator comes to that child's home who had died in a bus accident. Those investigators begin to investigate here, then they move to the kitchen. They observe that fork and spoon were stuck together. Investigator shakes them, at the same time, a knife is struck on his hand. Then investigator concentrates and notices as someone is sucking his blood from the upside of cupboard. But there was nothing as they unlocked that cupboard. On the other side, that lady investigator also observes some shaking objects. And the investigator who was at child's house, he does not notice any paranormal occurrence here. Contrarily, police officer makes him notice under the bed. But there was nothing. Then the investigator tries to look from the opposite side of the bed. Meanwhile, he glimpses a ghost there. Now investigator says to him that everything remains invisible from where the light falls. But everything is visible in the side of the darkness. Observing all, police officer calls his friend. On the other side, that investigator was noticing ghost in another house while chatting. He observes while moving here and there. Sometimes it is invisible and sometimes it begins to appear. Suddenly, it appears in front of that investigator. And he is feared. On the other side, his friend feels as he is perhaps in an affliction because he was talking on a call. So he comes to him, but that investigator was not appearing anywhere. Then he begins to hear the sounds from a cupboard. There was his investigator friend when he opens that cupboard. But he had been bewitched. Right now he was under the control of something supernatural. Now that police officer comes to that lady investigator. And he reveals the whole fact about her partner. But she does not concentrate too much. She was investigating the house wall of John, which was cracked to a great extent, and she tells the police officer. These things come from the different direction and they spread through water. Human being's body has also water, so those ghost figures are spreading. This full area will be haunted if it continues. That investigator was speaking it, then a hand appears from the crack of a wall. And it fractures her neck. Holding it, witnessing it, that police officer faces heart attack. And he falls down on the floor. After sometimes, he restores and moves into the kitchen while dragging himself. Alicia comes here, who was the mother of that late child. Seeing her, he asks her to carry him to the hospital and she asks him to get in the car. But he observes that her late son was also seated in the car. Now he gets in his own car while leaving her vehicle. At the same time, the dead body of that lady investigator appears to him. And it utters, there is still time and he can rescue all. But that police officer was so scared, he rescues himself and leaves this area. Now police co-worker conveys a message through walkie-talkie that he is in this area. And he asks him, where are you? He orders his co-worker, leave that place immediately. So that ghost may not harm him. After this, that police officer again visits that area, taking the petrol, and he begins to sprinkle that petrol on the house of Alicia. He observes that Alicia has also committed suicide, he also sprinkles petrol on her. Coming outside, he tries to set them on fire. Meanwhile, that investigator approaches there. Who was bewitched, he extinguishes his set flames. He takes his steps back and sets the fire through his gun. Scene drops here and Juan is again seen here. 3 new investigators had come to him for investigation. Now new investigators show the photos of former investigators. When those investigators show the photos to Juan, then he tells them that one of them is standing behind you. But his face is burned. They all 3 look behind, but there was no one. But a chair moves there and covers the camera mirror. And the movie ends on this scene.